there's also some evidence of side effects in children. The heart inflammation.
From the vaccine?
From the vaccines, yes. And so there's been a few studies that have been done, or at least one, that try to kind of juxtapose the risk, right? Are you familiar with these?
Yes. So what we see from my reading of the numbers, although it's difficult to assess, is because many of the reports are self-reported side effects. But what it looks like from the calculation is that there is a very concerning risk of heart inflammation, particularly in young males, so teenage boys and sort of adolescent boys, particularly. And that is, multiple-fold greater than their risk of heart inflammation without the vaccine. That's what I've read. Now, is that something to be worried about? Yes, absolutely, particularly since the risk of the disease itself in those same people is extremely low. So it is not something that only I am concerned with. We look at the FDA advisory panel that just recommended whether or not people should get boosters. Mm-hmm. And they voted for a recommendation of boosters in people over 65 and high-risk people. But they recommended against, 18-0 they voted, in fact, against a broad recommendation of boosters in younger people, meaning 18 to 65. But more than that, they called out specifically the concerning risk of myocarditis, heart inflammation, from the vaccine in young people, in teenagers. And so this is concerning to everyone, including people advising the FDA. It should be concerning to everyone, and every parent should be thinking, as a critical thinker, what's the risk of the illness we're trying to protect their child from versus what's the risk of the vaccine. And the risk of the illness is extraordinarily small. So any increased risk from the drug that you're injecting, it's a tough case to make, and it's an individual decision to inject an experimental vaccine into a child who has extremely low risk for the disease itself. Now, the other point about giving vaccines to children, if I may, is that I said this is an experimental technology. We do not have long-term tallies of side effects on this vaccine. It seems to be there's a lot of deaths from the vaccine that are reported. I'm not sure about the percent, but it's concerning as well, obviously. But we're talking about injecting children, okay? If you're 70 years old and you're taking a vaccine, your life expectancy is about 15 years. If you're a child who's 10 taking an experimental vaccine, with or without boosters, you're going to be living with that vaccine for decades. We don't know the long-term impact of these vaccines. I think it's something to at least think about. It's very important to think critically here. We're in an era where the trust in experts has been damaged. And that's a self-inflicted wound by the experts, by the politicization of science, by the censorship and these political diatribes written in scientific journals, by the censorship on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook about anything that questions the prevailing narrative. And what that means is that individuals are really now responsible for making their own critical assessments. There's been damage in the academic side. The university professors have been unhinged in their criticisms of people that have questioned and even put forward alternatives like targeted protection instead of broad lockdowns. And, part of that reaction by the university professors has destroyed the trust in people with credentials. And so we know credentials are not the magic end game here. It's being a critical thinker, and the responsibility is more and more on the individual.
I want to talk about this more, but before we go there, I'm just remembering when we spoke last, and this was something you had some pointed thoughts about. The data was showing that children actually don't spread the disease, and the mechanism of that was,
they don't frequently spread the disease.
Spread it a lot less than adults. Let's say, thank you for correcting me here. The question is, I think one of the reasons that people are pushing to vaccinate children, some people are, is because they imagine that it will help protect society more broadly, i.e., we don't want to kill grandma, so to speak, okay? But we also had this information back then that the children don't seem to spread the virus very much relative to adults. Has this changed? What is that reality? And I remember we were also talking about the ethical considerations of this sort of setup.
Well, the data has been in now for a year and a half. The children do not significantly spread the disease. And we know this from data all over the world. We know it from, Austria, Sweden, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the UK, on and on and on, including places like Sweden, who kept their schools open, 1.8 million children, no masks, no social distancing, and no secondary impact from that. We know that teachers do not have a higher incidence in those settings of the infection compared to other careers. And we know that when cases occur in schools, they almost always seem to come in from the adults carrying them into the school, not from the children. And that argument is over as far as I'm concerned, because no matter how often people insist the earth is flat, it's round, and the earth does not change its shape because more people keep insisting the earth is flat. So I'm not going to waste a lot of people's time explaining that. If these people are refractory to fact, then they're hopeless. So the disease is not significantly spread by children. The risk to teachers is not high, it's low. It's a low-risk environment. There is zero excuse for teachers to not teach in person. And there's a bigger issue, though, that you bring up that I think is worth saying, and that is that, to me, it's unconscionable that a society uses its children as shield for adults. The children do not have significant risk from this illness. Are we a society, a civilization, where we are using our children, even if they did spread it, as shields? We're going to inject our children with an experimental drug that they don't have a significant benefit from to shield ourselves. My role as a parent is to protect my children. My role is not, and I will never use my children as shields to somehow protect me. And that's really just a heinous violation of all moral principles, in my view. In terms of ethical considerations, I'd have to wonder about the ethics of a human subjects committee in an institutional review board, which has to approve all protocols. I'd have to worry about the ethical input into those people to design a clinical trial for vaccines on young children under 5 who have extremely low risk from this disease, injecting these children with drugs. I think our society has fallen remarkably low, frighteningly low, if that is the level of that we have sort of sunk to.